In the harsh frontier of 1870s Wyoming, a woman with nothing but a cast-iron skillet and wounded pride stumbled toward a flickering light. Her name was Delilah Quinn, and she was running. For 3 days, the high desert had been her only companion. The wind whispered threats in her ears, and the sun beat down on her with merciless intensity. Her stomach was a hollow ache, a constant reminder of the life she'd been forced to leave behind in the dusty mining town of Copper Creek. She had been cast out, banished, all for refusing the grubby, unwanted advances of a powerful mine foreman named Marcus Henley. When she'd defended herself, using the only weapon she had, a heavy rolling pin, he had twisted the story. He'd painted her as a thief and a temptress. The town, dependent on Henley's mine, had turned its back on her in an instant. So she walked. Her calico dress, a birthday gift from her late mother, was torn and faded. Her boots were worn through, the grit of the plains scraping against her raw feet. But in her hands, she clutched the one thing that connected her to her past and her strength. Her mother's cast-iron skillet, seasoned black and smooth as a river stone. Now, as twilight bled across the sky in hues of purple and orange, she saw it. Smoke. A thin ribbon curling up from a valley below. Where there was smoke, there were people. And where there were people, there was a chance. Her legs, weak from hunger and exhaustion, found a new strength. She crested a low ridge and looked down upon a cattle camp sprawling along a creek bed. Canvas tents, makeshift corrals, and the lowing of several hundred cattle filled the air. At the center of it all, a campfire crackled, a beacon of warmth and hope in the vast, lonely darkness. A man sat alone by the fire, his back to her. He was just a silhouette against the flames, hat tilted low, posture relaxed but alert. He seemed like any other ranch hand she'd ever seen, weathered, tired, alone. She took a deep breath, marshaling what little dignity she had left. "Evening," she called out, her voice raspy. The man turned. His face was carved by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind, the color of creek water after a fresh rain. He looked to be in his early 30s, with dark hair that curled from beneath his hat, and a mustache that needed a trim. When he smiled, the weariness in his face vanished, replaced by a genuine warmth that startled her. "Evening, miss," he said, rising to his feet with an easy grace. "You look like you've been traveling hard." "I have," she said, lifting her chin. She would not beg. "I'm looking for work. I can cook. And I can cook well." He studied her for a long moment. His gaze took in the tattered dress, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the skillet she held like a shield against her chest. There was no pity in his look, only a quiet assessment. "What's your name?" "Delilah Quinn." "I'm Sam," he said, gesturing toward the fire. "Sam Fletcher. And as it happens, our cook quit on us 2 days back. The boys and I have been living on beans and hardtack." A flicker of hope ignited in Delilah's chest. "I can do much better than beans and hardtack," she said, allowing a small, tired smile. "But I'll need supplies." "We've got supplies," he said. "Beef, flour, coffee. A wagon comes from Cheyenne once a week." He paused, his expression turning serious, his kind eyes searching hers. "What happened to you, Miss Quinn? If you don't mind my asking. You look like you're running from something." The question hung in the air, and the familiar burn of shame and anger rose in her throat. But there was no judgment in his voice, only sincere concern. She found herself wanting to tell him the truth. "I worked in a boarding house in Copper Creek," she began, her voice steady. "The mine foreman, he wouldn't take no for an answer. When I defended myself, they ran me out of town. Said I was the problem." She straightened her shoulders, the weight of the skillet a familiar comfort. "I won't apologize for protecting my honor." "I wouldn't expect you to," Sam said quietly, his voice a low rumble. "A man ought to keep his hands to himself, especially when a lady's made her wishes clear." The simple, unquestioning acceptance in his words nearly broke her. She'd expected suspicion, doubt, more questions. Instead, he just nodded once, as if her explanation was the most reasonable thing in the world. He turned back to the fire. "You hungry?" he asked. "I've got some coffee on. There's bread from this morning." "I am," she admitted, the word a painful confession. She settled on a fallen log he indicated, the warmth of the fire seeping into her chilled bones. He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. The warmth spread through her palms, a small blessing in a world that had offered her none. As they sat in a comfortable silence, other men began to drift in from the darkness, drawn by the fire and the smell of coffee. They were a rough-looking crew, some young and wiry, others old and grizzled, all of them bearing the marks of a hard life lived outdoors. "Boys," Sam said as they gathered around, his voice carrying an easy authority, "this is Miss Delilah Quinn. She's going to be our new cook." A chorus of pleased murmurs and relieved sighs went through the group. A young cowboy with a constellation of freckles and a shock of red hair grinned at her. "Ma'am, I'm Jake Morrison. Thank the Lord. Charlie's cooking was about to send me to an early grave." An older man with silver whiskers swatted at him playfully. "Hey now, my coffee ain't that bad." "Charlie, your coffee could peel the hide off a buffalo," another hand chimed in, earning a round of laughter. Delilah found herself smiling. There was an easy camaraderie here, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in a long, long time. They treated her with a polite respect that felt genuine, not forced. "What do you need to get started, Miss Quinn?" Sam asked. "Just Delilah, please," she said, "and a look at your supply wagon. I'll make do with what you have." As the evening wore on, she felt the tight knot of fear in her stomach begin to loosen. She learned they were driving a herd north to the railroad, a journey of several more weeks. Sam, she noticed, was a man of few words, but when he spoke, the others listened. He wasn't their boss in the traditional sense. He was their leader. There was a difference. A quiet authority radiated from him, a sense of complete competence that set him apart. When the men started drifting to their bedrolls, Sam showed her to a small tent near the supply wagon. "It's not much," he said, his voice low, "but it's private and dry. You'll be safe here." "Thank you, Sam," she said, and she meant it more than she'd ever meant anything. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me from Adam." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the blaze of stars overhead. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be judged for things that aren't your fault," he said finally. "Maybe because you've got the look of someone who's been fighting her whole life just to keep her head above water." The words struck her with an unexpected force, and she felt the hot sting of tears in her eyes. "I have been fighting," she whispered. "I know," he said gently. "But you don't have to fight alone anymore, not here." As she settled into the tent, wrapping the rough wool blankets around her, Delilah felt a feeling she hadn't dared to feel in months: hope. The ground was hard, the wind rattled the canvas, but she was safe. She was wanted, and tomorrow she would do what she did best. She would cook. She drifted to sleep listening to the sound of Sam's footsteps as he made one last round of the camp, a silent guardian watching over his small, temporary world. But what Delilah didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the humble cowboy who had offered her a lifeline was not a humble cowboy at all. Across the camp, in his own tent, the man calling himself Sam Fletcher pulled out a worn leather journal. By the light of a small oil lamp, he began to write. The journal wasn't filled with cattle counts or trail notes. It was filled with sketches, fragments of poetry, and observations on philosophy. And tonight, he wrote about a woman with eyes the color of a stormy sky and hands that gripped a cast-iron skillet like it was the only real thing in the world. His real name was Samuel Prescott III. He was the sole heir to the vast Prescott spread, a cattle empire that stretched across 3 counties, a dynasty that controlled half the territory's wealth and political power. He was a prince of this wild land, running from the gilded cage of his own life, a life of suffocating expectations, of friendships soured by greed and an arranged marriage to a woman he did not love. Out here, as Sam Fletcher, he was just a man, respected for his skill, not his name. For the first time, he felt free. And now this woman, Delilah Quinn, had stumbled into his carefully constructed reality. He'd seen the strength in her, the fire that hardship hadn't managed to extinguish. It was a strength he admired, a fire that drew him in. It had nothing to do with pity. He closed the journal, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. He was living a lie, a necessary lie, he told himself, but a lie nonetheless. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that when the truth finally came out, it would destroy the fragile trust they had just begun to build. He just hoped he could keep the mask on long enough to protect her. But in the Wyoming territory, secrets had a way of getting buried, and an even stronger way of being dug back up. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh biscuits woke the camp before the sun. Delilah was in her element, the cast-iron skillet her trusted partner, the fire her willing servant. She'd found flour, bacon, and even a few precious eggs in the supply wagon. She moved with an efficiency and grace that transformed the simple act of cooking into a kind of art. The men gathered, their faces full of awe and gratitude. "Lord have mercy," old Charlie whispered, taking a bite of a fluffy biscuit. "I've died and gone to heaven." Jake Morrison, the young redhead, practically inhaled his plate. "Ma'am, if you ever leave us, I'm following you." Sam emerged from his tent, his hair still tousled from sleep. The sight of him sent a strange flutter through Delilah's chest. He accepted the plate she offered, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. A jolt, like lightning, passed between them. He took a bite of a biscuit, his eyes closing in pure, unadulterated pleasure. "This is remarkable," he said, his voice low and meant only for her. "I haven't had biscuits like this since I was a boy." Delilah felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. It was his praise, the genuine delight in his eyes. She felt seen, valued. But the peaceful morning was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Fast horses. Sam's head snapped up, his entire posture changing in an instant. The easygoing cowboy was gone, replaced by a coiled, watchful leader. "Delilah, stay near the fire," he said, his voice a low command. 5 riders crested the ridge, dust billowing behind them. The man in the lead wore a sheriff's badge, his face a mask of grim authority. It was Sheriff Watkins from Copper Creek, and behind him, Delilah recognized the sneering face of one of Marcus Henley's cronies. Her blood ran cold. Henley had sent them. "Morning," the sheriff called out, reining in his horse. His eyes scanned the camp and landed on Delilah, a flicker of triumph in their depths. "I'm looking for a woman named Delilah Quinn." "What business do you have with Miss Quinn?" Sam asked, stepping forward. He moved with a subtle motion, placing himself squarely between Delilah and the lawman. "She's wanted for questioning," Watkins said, his voice dripping with false authority. "In connection with a violent assault and theft. Marcus Henley was seriously injured, and the boarding house is missing a considerable sum of money." "That's a lie!" Delilah cried out, her voice shaking but strong. "I defended myself! I never stole a penny in my life!" "That's not how Mr. Henley tells it," the sheriff sneered. "Says you came at him like a wildcat, then cleaned out the cash box. We have witnesses." "Witnesses he paid for," Sam said, his voice dangerously calm. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, focusing on Sam for the first time. He took in the worn clothes, the humble camp. "And who might you be, cowboy, to be questioning official business?" "The name's Sam Fletcher. This is my camp, and Miss Quinn is my cook. She's under my protection." Watkins laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Your protection? Son, you're interfering with a lawful investigation. I have a warrant. Now step aside before I arrest you for obstruction." "Let me see it," Sam said. Not a request, a demand. The sheriff, taken aback by his audacity, hesitated for a moment before pulling a folded paper from his jacket. Sam took it, his eyes scanning the document. Delilah watched, puzzled. For a simple ranch hand, he seemed unnervingly comfortable with legal papers. "This warrant is for questioning, not arrest," Sam said, his voice like ice. "And it's issued by a judge in Copper Creek. You're in Cheyenne County now, Sheriff. Your piece of paper isn't worth the ink it's printed on. You have no jurisdiction here." A tense silence fell over the camp. Sheriff Watkins stared at Sam, his bravado faltering. How would you know about jurisdiction?" one of his deputies stammered. Sam offered a thin, cold smile. "I know a lot of things. I know that Marcus Henley is a snake, and I know a corrupt lawman on his payroll when I see one." "Watch your mouth, Fletcher," Watkins snarled, his hand inching toward his gun. "She's not going with you," Sam said, his voice dropping to a low growl. Every man in his crew subtly shifted, their hands moving to rest on their own sidearms. The message was unmistakable. An attack on one was an attack on all, and they all followed Sam. Watkins looked from Sam to the dozen determined faces surrounding him. He was a bully, but he wasn't a fool. He was outmanned and outmaneuvered. "You're making a powerful enemy, Fletcher," Watkins spat, his face contorted with rage. "Seems to me you're the one who's a long way from home," Sam replied coolly. "Now I suggest you and your boys ride on back to Copper Creek and tell Marcus Henley that Delilah Quinn is off limits, permanently." The sheriff hesitated, his eyes darting from Sam back to Delilah. In that brief moment, Delilah saw a flicker of something else in his eyes as he stared at Sam. It wasn't just anger, it was recognition. A dawning, horrified recognition. Watkins' face went pale. He yanked on his reins, wheeling his horse around so fast it nearly stumbled. "This isn't over, Prescott," he muttered, the name barely a whisper, carried on the wind. But Delilah heard it. Prescott. The sheriff and his men galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and stunned silence in their wake. Delilah stood frozen, the sheriff's muttered word echoing in her mind. Prescott, the name of the richest, most powerful family in the territory. It couldn't be. Sam turned to her, the hard mask of the leader softening back into the concerned face of the man who'd offered her coffee. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. But she couldn't speak. She just stared at him, really seeing him for the first time. The quiet confidence, the unexpected knowledge of the law, the absolute loyalty he commanded from his men, the way the sheriff had looked at him with dawning terror. "Sam," Jake Morrison said, his young face pale. "He called you Prescott." Sam's jaw tightened. He shot Jake a look that silenced the young man instantly. He turned back to Delilah, his eyes pleading with her. "Delilah, who are you?" she whispered, the question hanging between them, heavy and dangerous. "I'm the man who told you you didn't have to fight alone anymore," he said, his voice strained. "That's all that matters." But as he walked away to check on the cattle, his shoulders tense, Delilah knew he was lying. The humble cowboy she'd found was a phantom, a ghost, and the man underneath was someone far more powerful and far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The world she had just escaped had found her again, but this time the stakes were impossibly higher. The name Prescott hung in the air like a ghost, unspoken but felt by everyone. A wall of ice had formed between Delilah and Sam. She cooked for the men, her hands moving with mechanical precision, but the joy was gone. She was polite, distant. She called him Mr. Fletcher, and each time he flinched as if struck. The other men felt it too. The easy laughter around the campfire died down. Jake would shoot worried glances between them. Old Charlie just shook his head, a sad look in his wise eyes. Delilah's mind raced. Prescott. Could it be a coincidence? A mistake? Or was the kind, simple man who had saved her living a lie of monumental proportions? She started watching him, really watching. And the pieces started to click into place, forming a picture that made her stomach twist with dread. She saw the way he handled the supply invoices, his eyes flying across the columns of figures with the ease of a seasoned businessman, not a simple cowhand. She noticed the quality of his boots, worn, yes, but made of a leather so fine it was unmistakable. And then there was the ring, a heavy gold signet ring she'd glimpsed only once, bearing a coat of arms with a rearing horse. He'd hidden it quickly, but not before she'd seen it. It was the ring of a nobleman, not a drifter. One afternoon, when Sam and most of the men were out chasing strays, Delilah's suspicion became a gnawing certainty she could no longer ignore. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of guilt and desperation. She told herself she was just seeking the truth. But she knew she was about to cross a line. She slipped into his tent. It was sparse, neat, a bedroll, a saddle, a small wooden crate serving as a table. On the crate lay the leather journal, and beside it, the gold signet ring. With trembling fingers, she picked up the ring. The inscription on the inside was tiny but clear. Samuel Prescott III. A cold wave washed over her. It was true, all of it. Samuel Prescott III, the heir to the entire Prescott empire, the man the newspapers called the Prince of Wyoming. Her hand shaking, she reached for the journal. She knew she shouldn't. It was a violation of the deepest trust, but she had to know. She had to understand the lie. She opened it. The first page she saw wasn't about cattle. It was about her. She arrived like a storm-tossed bird, all pride and fire and wounded dignity. There is a strength in her I have never encountered in the drawing rooms of Denver. A raw, honest courage. She does not know who I am, and for that, I am grateful. She sees Sam Fletcher, the man. Not the Prescott name, the Prescott fortune. How can I ever tell her the truth? To tell her would be to lose the only genuine thing I have ever found. Delilah's breath caught in her throat. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning his elegant, precise script. He wrote of his father's suffocating demands of an arranged marriage to a Denver socialite named Catherine Harrington, a union he described as a business merger of souls. He wrote of his desire for a real life, a life of purpose, a life where he was valued for his character, not his bank account. This wasn't a game to him. It was an escape, a desperate search for authenticity. She was so absorbed, she didn't hear the footsteps outside. The tent flap rustled. Delilah's head snapped up. Sam stood in the entrance, his face a canvas of shock, hurt, and a strange, heartbreaking relief. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. She couldn't speak. She could only stare at him, the open journal in her lap a damning piece of evidence. The lie was out, exposed in the dim light of the tent, and it was uglier than she had imagined. "Sam, I had to know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "So now you do," he said, stepping inside. He didn't look angry. He just looked defeated. He picked up the signet ring, turning it over and over in his palm. "Samuel Prescott III, at your service." The words were laced with a bitterness that tore at her heart. "Why?" she asked, the single word encompassing a universe of questions. "Why lie to me? To all of them?" "Because the truth is a cage," he burst out, the quiet cowboy vanishing completely, replaced by a man cornered and desperate. "Do you have any idea what it's like? To never know if someone likes you for you or for the name you carry? To have every friendship, every kindness, every smile be suspect? I came out here to be just a man, to see if I was worth anything without the Prescott name attached." "And me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Was I part of the experiment, the poor, helpless woman you could rescue to prove your own worth?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "Never. You are the most real thing that has ever happened to me." "Was I?" she shot back, the hurt turning to anger. "You let me believe we were the same, two outcasts against the world. But it was all a fantasy, wasn't it? You're playing at being poor, Mr. Prescott. When you get tired of the dirt and the hard work, you can go back to your mansion. I don't have that choice. This is my reality. Delilah, this has nothing to do with money." "It has everything to do with money," she cried, standing up, the journal falling to the floor between them. "You have a fiancé, a life waiting for you. What did you think was going to happen here? Did you think you could just keep me as your camp cook, your little frontier amusement, until you were ready to go back to your real life? The accusation struck him like a physical blow. He paled, the pain in his eyes so raw it was almost unbearable to watch. I don't know, he admitted, his voice a broken whisper. I didn't think that far ahead. I just knew that when I was with you, I felt alive. I felt like myself. Who is yourself, Sam? She demanded, her voice dripping with scorn. The humble cowboy or the millionaire heir, because you can't be both. She turned to leave, to escape the suffocating confines of the tent and the lie it represented. The man who is falling in love with you, he said quietly to her back. That's who I am. She froze, her hand on the tent flap. The words, so simple and so devastating, hung in the air. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to. But how could she? His entire existence here was a lie. How could she believe that his feelings were the one true thing? She pushed through the flap and stumbled out into the harsh afternoon sun, her eyes blinded by tears. She heard him call her name, a desperate pleading sound. But she didn't turn back. She couldn't. The man she was falling in love with didn't exist. He was a ghost, a story told around a campfire. And the man who was real, Samuel Prescott III, belonged to another world. A world where a woman like her, with nothing but a skillet and a wounded heart, could never, ever belong. And just as that devastating thought crossed her mind, she saw a new cloud of dust on the horizon, a different kind of dust. It wasn't a lone sheriff. It was a procession, a fine carriage, flanked by well-dressed men on magnificent horses. This wasn't the law. This was society. And Delilah knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the very marrow of her bones, that his other life had come to reclaim him. The game was over. The carriage that rolled into camp was a vision of black lacquer and polished brass, pulled by 4 perfectly matched gray horses. It was a vessel from another universe, a world of wealth and power that had no place in the rugged simplicity of the cattle drive. A woman descended from the carriage. She was, in a word, perfect. Her traveling suit was made of deep blue velvet, tailored to perfection. A small, elegant hat with a single feather was perched atop her immaculately styled dark hair. She moved with an unconscious grace and an air of absolute confidence, the kind that comes from a lifetime of never being told no. This was Catherine Harrington, Sam's fiancée. Samuel, she said, her voice like the chiming of tiny cold bells. She surveyed the dusty camp, her lip curling in faint, well-bred disgust. My darling, you look positively barbaric. Sam stood frozen, the color drained from his face. He looked like a man caught between 2 colliding worlds, about to be crushed in the impact. Catherine, he said, his voice strained. What are you doing here? What am I doing? She laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. I'm rescuing you, of course. Your father is beside himself with worry. We all were. When the sheriff from that dreadful little town sent word that he'd found you living like this. She gestured dismissively at the camp, at the men, at Delilah. Well, we knew we had to intervene. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the camp and landed on Delilah. She sized her up in a single, swift glance, her expression shifting from mild amusement to a cool, calculating assessment. It was the look of a queen spotting a peasant who had wandered too close to the throne. So the sheriff hadn't just recognized Sam. He had reported back to the powers that be. He was a pawn for a much larger player. Samuel, this little adventure of yours has gone on long enough, Catherine continued, placing a gloved hand on his arm, a gesture of clear ownership. The engagement announcement is set to run in the Denver papers next week. The contracts are signed. Our families are waiting. Contracts. Delilah's heart sank. This wasn't about love or marriage. This was a merger, an acquisition, and Sam was the primary asset. What if I'm not ready to come back? Sam said, his voice low. Catherine's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. Not ready. Darling, it's not a matter of readiness. It's a matter of duty. The Harrington Railroad needs the Prescott beef contracts. The Prescott Empire needs access to our shipping lines. It's a brilliant arrangement, one our fathers have spent years constructing. You can't simply walk away from it. She followed his gaze, which had flickered helplessly toward Delilah. A flicker of understanding, cold and sharp, dawned in Catherine's eyes. "Oh, Samuel," she sighed, a patronizing, pitying sound. "Don't tell me you formed an attachment." She looked directly at Delilah, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm sure she's a perfectly adequate camp cook, but you must be realistic. A man of your standing cannot afford such sentimental distractions." The words were designed to wound, to diminish, to put Delilah firmly in her place as a temporary servant, a nobody, and they did. Delilah felt the eyes of every man in the camp on her, their faces a mixture of pity and embarrassment. "Miss Quinn is more than that," Sam started, but Catherine cut him off. "Of course she is," she said smoothly. "But the fact remains, your future is in Denver, with me." She opened her elegant handbag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She walked directly toward Delilah, stopping just a few feet away. The scent of expensive French perfume filled the air, a stark contrast to the dust and sagebrush. "Miss Quinn," Catherine said, her voice now a conspiratorial whisper, yet loud enough for Sam to hear. "I understand. Samuel has a noble heart. He feels responsible for you. But you and I both know what's best for him." She opened the pouch and poured a cascade of gleaming gold coins into her gloved hand. It was more money than Delilah had ever seen in her life. Enough to start over, to buy a small house, to be safe and secure forever. "A gift," Catherine said, "for your trouble. Enough for you to go anywhere you like. California, perhaps. Start a new life. All you have to do is tell Samuel that you're leaving, that you never wanted anything more from him than a job. Release him from his misplaced sense of obligation." It wasn't a gift. It was a bribe, a dismissal. "And if I refuse?" Delilah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Catherine's smile vanished. The mask of civility dropped, revealing the cold, hard steel beneath. "Then things will become unpleasant," she said, her voice dropping to a menacing hush. "That foreman in Copper Creek, Mr. Henley, he is a man with friends in low places, friends who are indebted to my father. If you remain a problem, I can't guarantee your safety. Accidents happen on the frontier all the time." A threat, a clear, brutal threat. Delilah's blood ran cold. This woman wasn't just a socialite. She was ruthless. Delilah looked at Sam. His face was a mask of agony. He was trapped, utterly and completely. His fiancée was threatening the woman he, cared for, loved, and he was powerless to stop her. This was his world, a world of quiet threats and gilded cages where people were moved around like pawns on a chessboard. "So, what will it be, Miss Quinn?" Catherine asked, holding out the gold. "A fortune and a future? Or a stubborn, foolish pride that will likely get you killed?" Every eye was on her. This was the moment of truth. She could take the money and run, save herself, or she could stand her ground and face the wrath of one of the most powerful families in the West. She thought of her mother. She thought of the skillet in her hands. She thought of what it meant to have nothing but your own self-respect. She looked Catherine Harrington dead in the eye. "I don't want your money," Delilah said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even herself. Catherine's eyes widened in disbelief. "And you can tell Mr. Henley," Delilah continued, her courage surging, "that if he ever comes near me again, I'll finish the job I started with that rolling pin." A collective gasp went through the camp. Jake Morrison's jaw dropped. Old Charlie actually smiled. Delilah turned her back on the gold, on the beautiful, venomous woman, and looked at Sam. She gave him a small, sad smile. "I believe my employment here is terminated," she said softly. "I'll be packed by morning." She walked toward her tent, her back straight, her head held high. She had made her choice. She had chosen herself. But as she walked, she heard Catherine's voice, sharp and angry. "You see, Samuel? She's impossible. Now, You will get in this carriage and we will return to Denver and put this sordid little affair behind us." Delilah didn't wait to hear his reply. She couldn't bear it. She had just signed her own death warrant, and the man she had done it for was about to walk out of her life forever. The hope that had flickered in her heart just days ago was finally brutally extinguished. That night, the camp was suffocatingly quiet. A thick blanket of tension pressed down on them all. Catherine Harrington sat by the fire, a queen holding court in a kingdom of dirt, while her men stood guard. Sam sat across from her, silent and grim, a prisoner in his own life. Delilah stayed in her tent, packing her few meager belongings: the skillet, her mother's worn recipe book, the tattered calico dress. She wrote a short, simple letter to Sam, a final goodbye, and tucked it into his bedroll. She would be gone before dawn. She had to be. Just as the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky, she slipped out of her tent. The camp was still. Catherine was asleep in her fine carriage. Sam was a dark shape, still sitting by the dying embers of the fire, his head in his hands. He looked up as she approached, his face haggard in the pale light. He had seen her. There would be no clean escape. "You're leaving," he stated, his voice hollow. "It's the only way, Sam," she said softly. "No," he said, standing up. He looked past her, a new sharp fear in his eyes. "It's too late." Delilah turned, and her heart stopped. Standing at the edge of the camp, a silhouette against the rising sun, was Charlie, the kind, old, whiskered ranch hand she had come to see as a friend. But he wasn't alone, and he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Sam, a look of profound apology and sorrow on his face. "He's here, son," Charlie said, his voice heavy with regret. "Your father. He's here." Over the ridge they came, not in a carriage but on horseback, a dozen riders armed with rifles, their faces hard and uncompromising. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of a private army. At their head rode a man who could only be Thomas Prescott II. He was older than Sam, his hair streaked with silver, but he sat on his magnificent black stallion with the posture of a king. He had Sam's jawline, Sam's eyes, but where Sam's held kindness, his father's held chips of granite. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was an invasion. And Delilah suddenly understood the terrible truth. Charlie, kind, gentle Charlie. He hadn't just been a ranch hand, he had been a spy. The entire time he had been reporting Sam's every move back to his father. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it stole the air from her lungs. She wasn't just alone, she had never, not for 1 second, been safe. The entire camp, the entire escape, had been a stage, and everyone but her had known it. "Samuel!" Thomas Prescott's voice boomed across the camp, a sound of absolute, unquestionable authority. "This foolishness ends now." Sam's father was the very picture of power. He dismounted, his expensive boots landing softly in the dust, his cold eyes sweeping over the camp with utter disdain. They landed on Sam, and then with even more contempt, on Delilah. "I gave you a chance to handle this with dignity, Samuel," Thomas Prescott said, his voice laced with cold fury. "You chose to consort with this." He waved a dismissive hand in Delilah's direction. "You have embarrassed the Prescott name for the last time." Catherine Harrington emerged from her carriage, a smug, triumphant smile on her face. This was her victory. She had summoned the king to put down the rebellion. "Father," Sam began, his voice tight. "Do not call me father," the older man snapped. "You have forfeited that right. You are a disgrace. I have brought our family lawyers. You will sign these papers, renounce this woman, and return to Denver to fulfill your obligations. Or so help me God, I will strip you of the Prescott name, and you will leave here with nothing but the clothes on your back." The threat was absolute. He wasn't just threatening to disinherit Sam. He was threatening to erase him. He then turned his chilling gaze on Delilah. "As for you, Miss Quinn, my son's fiancé was generous. I am not." He pulled a bank draft from his coat. It was the same one Catherine had offered. "Take this and disappear. If you refuse, I will not be as subtle as Miss Harrington. I will personally see to it that you are charged with theft and assault in Copper Creek. I will fund the prosecution myself. You will rot in a territorial prison. Do you understand me?" Delilah stood frozen, caught in the crossfire of a war she had never asked to be a part of. The world had shrunk to this single, terrible moment. Sam's father was a tyrant, his fiancée a viper, his friend a traitor. Sam himself was a prisoner, about to be broken. This was it. The end of the line. She had nothing, no one, except for the skillet, the heavy, black, cast-iron skillet still clutched in her hand. Her mother's skillet, a tool for making something from nothing, a weapon for defending what was hers. And in that moment, something inside Delilah Quinn snapped. She had been pushed and threatened and chased and bribed. She had been called a thief, a seductress, a nobody. She was done running. She was done being afraid. With a cry that was pure, unadulterated rage, she did the only thing she could think of. She lunged forward, not at Thomas Prescott, not at his armed guards. She lunged toward the campfire. With all her might, she swung the heavy skillet and slammed it into the large pot of coffee that was hanging over the flames. The pot exploded. A geyser of boiling black coffee and fiery embers erupted into the air, showering the area around the fire. Men shouted and jumped back. Horses reared in panic. For a single chaotic moment, the disciplined formation of Prescott's army was broken. It was the diversion of a lifetime. And in that split second of chaos, Sam moved. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He strode directly to his father, who was momentarily distracted by his panicked horse, and snatched the leather portfolio from the lawyer's hands. "You're right, father!" Sam shouted over the din, his voice ringing with a new, startling power. "The foolishness does end now!" He held up a document from the portfolio, not the disinheritance papers, but something else. Something old and brittle. "You want to talk about family honor?" Sam's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "Let's talk about the original partnership agreement between Grandfather Prescott and the Harrington family, the one you signed as a witness 30 years ago." Thomas Prescott's face went white. "What are you doing?" "I'm doing what you taught me to do," Sam retorted. "Protecting the family's interests. Section 12, subsection 4, a morality clause. It states the engagement is void if either party acts in a way that brings dishonor upon the other." "That clause was to protect Catherine from you," Thomas roared. "It works both ways," Sam countered. "And threatening to imprison an innocent woman seems pretty dishonorable to me, father. I'd say that voids the contract, wouldn't you, Catherine?" Catherine stared, speechless, her perfect plan unraveling before her eyes. "But that's not the best part," Sam said, a grim, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He pulled out another document. "This is Grandfather's original deed to the Southern Range, the land the Harringtons believe we acquired legally as part of our dowry agreement." He held it up for his father to see. A single line of text had been circled in pencil. "Funny thing about this deed," Sam said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "It seems Grandfather never actually filed it. He held it in trust, which means, for the last 30 years, the entire Harrington rail spur has been running through Prescott land they never paid for, land you never told them they didn't own." A dead silence fell over the camp. The armed guards stared. The lawyers looked horrified. Sam had just dropped a bomb. His father hadn't just been a tyrant. He had been a cheat. The entire Prescott-Harrington alliance, the foundation of their shared empire, was built on a 30-year-old lie. Thomas Prescott staggered back as if he'd been shot. All the power, all the authority drained from his face, replaced by the ashen look of a man utterly and completely defeated. He had been exposed by his own son. Sam now held all the cards. He could destroy his father. He could destroy the Harringtons. He held the fate of 2 dynasties in his hands. He looked at his father, then at Catherine. Then his eyes found Delilah's across the chaotic, smoldering campsite. She stood there, skillet in hand, her face smudged with soot, her eyes wide with disbelief. She hadn't just created a diversion, she had given him the opening he needed to win the war. "So," Sam said, his voice calm and steady in the ringing silence, "I believe we have some new terms to discuss." The balance of power had shifted. The prince had become the king. And it had all happened because of a homeless woman with a cast-iron skillet and a spirit that refused to break. The negotiation that followed was not a negotiation at all. It was a surrender. In the space of 10 minutes, standing in the dust and smoke of the disrupted camp, Samuel Prescott III dismantled his father's empire and rebuilt it on his own terms. The tyrannical patriarch, Thomas Prescott, was a broken man, his 30-year deception laid bare. The threat of a lawsuit from the Harringtons that would ruin them all was the gun Sam now held to his head. Catherine Harrington, seeing her future of power and control evaporate, was the first to fold. She wanted no part of the public scandal. The engagement was dissolved on the spot. She got into her fine carriage, her face a mask of cold fury, and vanished back to the world of society, defeated. Thomas Prescott had no choice but to accept his son's terms. The old man would retain his title, but the operational control of the entire Prescott spread, every acre, every cow, every dollar, was transferred to a new trust. A trust controlled by one man, Samuel. The armed guards and the lawyers mounted their horses and retreated, following their vanquished leader. They left behind a camp that was quiet, stunned, and irrevocably changed. When they were gone, only Sam's men, Charlie, Sam, and Delilah, remained. Charlie, the old traitor, shuffled forward, his head bowed in shame. "Sam, your father. He forced me. He threatened my family." Sam held up a hand, silencing him. He looked at the old man, and Delilah saw not anger, but a profound sadness. "I know, Charlie. He controls everyone." He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "You can stay, but the trust is broken. It will take a long time to mend." Charlie nodded, tears welling in his eyes, and retreated into the background. Finally, Sam turned to Delilah. He stood before her, no longer a humble cowboy, no longer a prince in disguise, but a man who had seized his own destiny. He looked at the skillet she still held in her hand, then met her eyes. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No," she whispered. "I was just tired of being pushed around." "You did more than that," he said, stepping closer. "You showed me what it means to fight. All my life I've been fighting against my father, against my name, but you fight for things, for honor, for yourself." He reached out and gently took the skillet from her hand, setting it down by the fire. He then took her hands in his. They were rough, calloused, and smudged with soot. He held them as if they were the most precious things in the world. "I told my father I was renouncing my inheritance," he said softly. "And I meant it. I was ready to walk away with nothing, as long as I had you." "Sam, you would have hated it," she said, her voice trembling. "Poverty is not romantic when it's real." "Maybe," he admitted, "but it wouldn't have mattered. Because the moment you threw that coffee, I realized something. My inheritance isn't the land or the money. It's the strength I inherited from my grandfather. The strength to build something. And I don't want to build it alone." He pulled a document from his pocket. It wasn't one of his father's contracts. It was a fresh piece of paper, covered in his own handwriting. "This is a new partnership agreement," he said, his eyes burning with intensity. "The Prescott Quinn Ranch." Delilah's heart stopped. "What?" "Co-directors, equal partners, 50-50 in everything." He looked at her, his soul bared in his gaze. "Delilah Quinn, you came here with nothing but a skillet and your pride. You faced down a corrupt sheriff, a venomous fiancé, and a tyrannical father. You have more courage and integrity than anyone I have ever known. I don't want you to be my cook. I don't want you to be my salvation. I want you to be my partner." Tears streamed down Delilah's face, washing away the soot and the fear. tears of shock, of relief, of a joy so profound it was painful. "Are you asking me to marry you, Samuel Prescott?" she whispered. He smiled, the first genuine carefree smile she had seen on his face all day. "No, I'm asking you to go into business with me. I'll ask you to marry me later, over a proper dinner, one that you don't have to cook." She laughed, a real, full-throated laugh that felt like a release of every bad thing that had ever happened to her. "I think," she said, her voice shaking with happiness, "that I can agree to those terms." 6 months later, a new brand was pressed into the hide of a calf on the freshly renamed Prescott Quinn Ranch. The brand was a simple design, a P and a Q intertwined, enclosed in a circle. It was a symbol of their new beginning, a partnership forged in fire and chaos, built on a foundation of truth and equality. Delilah stood beside Sam at the corral fence, no longer a desperate woman on the run, but the co-owner of one of the largest ranches in the territory. She wore a simple but well-made dress, and around her neck, on a silver chain, hung a small pendant, a miniature replica of their new brand. A gift from her partner. They had built a new kind of empire, one where the workers were treated with respect, paid fairly, and valued as people. They were changing the territory, one act of decency at a time. Thomas Prescott remained on the sidelines, a distant, humbled figure, watching as his son and the woman he'd dismissed as a nobody created something more successful and more honorable than he ever had. Sam slid his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Happy, partner?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "More than you know," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. They stood together, watching the sun set over the vast expanse of land that was theirs. Not through birthright or deception, but through courage and a love that had proven strong enough to tear down one world and build another in its place. The humble cook fire where their story began was long gone, but its warmth lived on in the life they had built together. A life of shared purpose, endless horizons, and the quiet, powerful knowledge that they were, and always would be, equal partners in all things. They had faced down the demons of the past and won. And in the heart of the wild Wyoming territory, they found not just a home, but a love that was as real and enduring as the land itself. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. You won't want to miss the tale we have coming for you tomorrow.